The Proxima Dawn shuddered violently as it entered the atmosphere of Proxima b, its thrusters straining to stabilize the descent. Commander Sienna Holt gripped the edge of her console, her teeth clenched as the ship groaned under the pressure. This was no ordinary mission. For decades, Proxima b had been regarded as the great mystery of humanity's interstellar expansion. The colony ship Erebus, launched 150 years ago, had vanished without a trace upon reaching the exoplanet. No distress signals, no survivors. The place had been written off as a cosmic graveyard, until now. "Stabilizing descent vector," said Lieutenant Marcus Kane, the ship's expert pilot, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Landing zone identified. Surface looks rough but manageable." Sienna glanced at the external monitors, her breath catching at the sight of the planet below. Proxima b's surface was bathed in the dim crimson light of its host star, a world of jagged cliffs and dark, sprawling forests that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. It was hauntingly beautiful, yet eerily foreboding. "Let's not add our names to the list of casualties," she muttered, her voice dry but laced with tension. "Take us down, Kane." "Copy that," Kane replied, his hands moving deftly over the controls. The ship touched down with a jarring thud on a rocky plateau, the dust outside swirling into a crimson haze. Inside, the crew of 8, each hand-picked for their expertise, exchanged uneasy glances. There was excitement, yes, but it was tinged with the unspoken dread of stepping onto a planet where an entire colony had vanished. "All right, people," Sienna said, standing to address her team. Her voice carried the authority of a seasoned commander, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "We're here to find out what happened to the Erebus and its people. We move in pairs, stay in constant communication, and stick to the mission objectives. No heroics." "Understood." A chorus of affirmations followed, though the tension was palpable. Dr. Ilara Voss, the team's xenobiologist, checked her equipment one last time, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "The atmospheric readings are stable," she said. "Oxygen levels are higher than expected, but there's something unusual about the composition." "Define unusual," Sienna prompted, frowning. "It's almost as if the air itself is alive," Ilara replied, her voice trailing off as she stared at her monitor. "But I'll need to run more tests." "Great," muttered Sergeant Callum Reyes, the team's security specialist, as he hefted his pulse rifle. "Living air. Just what we need." Sienna ignored the comment, turning instead to Kane. "You and Reyes stay with the ship. Maintain a perimeter and keep the engines warm. The rest of us will head toward the coordinates from the Erebus's last known transmission." The team disembarked into the alien wilderness, their boots crunching against the rocky terrain. The forest loomed ahead, its massive, bioluminescent trees casting an otherworldly glow in the dim light. The air was thick, heavy with an almost electric charge that made the hairs on the back of Sienna's neck stand on end. "Something about this place doesn't feel right," murmured Lieutenant Arjun Patel, the team's engineer, as they ventured deeper into the forest. "It's too vibrant." "Stay focused," Sienna said, though she couldn't shake the same feeling. The forest wasn't just alive, it was watching. They reached the coordinates after an hour of cautious trekking. What they found stopped them in their tracks. A sprawling settlement lay before them, half consumed by the forest. The structures were unmistakably human in design, prefabricated domes, solar arrays, and metal walkways, but they were overgrown with alien flora that seemed to pulse and writhe as if feeding on the remnants. Yet, the most unsettling detail wasn't the state of decay. It was the movement. Figures moved among the ruins. "Are those people?" whispered Ilara, her voice barely audible. Through the dense foliage, they could see humanoid shapes, their movements fluid yet unnatural. Their forms were elongated, their limbs bending at impossible angles. They glowed faintly, their skin a translucent mesh of human tissue and bioluminescent veins. "Holy hell," Arjun muttered. "What are they?" "Survivors," Ilara suggested, though her voice was laced with doubt. "Survivors don't look like that," Reyes replied over the comms from the ship. Sienna raised a hand, signaling for silence. She reached for her comm team. Maintain visual contact but do not engage. Elara, can you get a reading on them? Elara's handheld scanner emitted a soft hum as she pointed it toward the figures. Her face paled as she read the data. Their DNA is human but heavily altered. It's like the planet has rewritten their biology. Before Sienna could respond, one of the figures turned its head sharply in their direction, its glowing eyes locking onto them. The others followed suit, their movements synchronized like a hive mind. Then, they began to move fast. Fall back, Sienna ordered, drawing her sidearm. The team scrambled to retreat, but the creatures were on them in seconds. One of them lunged at Arjun, its elongated fingers wrapping around his arm. He screamed as its touch sent a ripple of light through his body, as though it was draining him. Reyes, still at the ship, fired a pulse round from his position, the shot hitting the creature square in the chest. It let out a high-pitched wail and dissolved into a burst of light. "They can be killed," Reyes shouted over the comms. Sienna fired at another creature, her shot hitting its leg. It staggered but didn't stop, its glowing veins pulsing brighter. Elara threw a sonic grenade, the explosion disorienting the creatures long enough for the team to retreat to a defensible position behind a cluster of rock. "What the hell are these things?" Arjun gasped, clutching his injured arm. "They're not just survivors," Elara said, her voice trembling. "They've evolved. Adapted to this planet in ways we can't even begin to understand. And they don't want us here," Sienna added grimly. As the creatures regrouped, their movements more aggressive, Sienna knew they couldn't stay. "We're pulling out. Everyone back to the ship. Now." The team ran, the creatures close behind. The forest seemed to close in around them, the bioluminescent trees pulsating with the same rhythm as the creatures' veins. It was as if the planet itself was alive, working against them. They reached the ship in a flurry of panic. Kane and Reyes were already at the ramp, firing at the pursuing creatures. "Get in!" Kane shouted. Sienna was the last to board, turning just in time to see the creatures stop at the edge of the clearing. They didn't cross the boundary, instead standing in eerie silence, their glowing eyes fixed on the ship. As the ramp sealed and the ship lifted off, Sienna's heart pounded. They had come to Proxima B searching for answers, but they had found something far more terrifying. And it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Proxima Dawn rocketed into the upper atmosphere, the blood-red horizon of Proxima B shrinking below them. Inside, the crew was silent, shaken by the encounter with the creatures that had once been human. Sienna Holt paced the cockpit, her mind racing. "What the hell just happened down there?" Kane muttered, his hands gripping the flight controls. "We found the colony," Sienna said grimly, her voice tight with frustration. "But it's not what we expected." Reyes checked the perimeter cameras, the sweat on his brow betraying his usual stoic demeanor. "They didn't follow us into the clearing." "Why?" Sienna didn't have an answer. All she knew was that they had narrowly escaped, and the situation had gone from exploratory to survival in a matter of hours. "Those things were more than just evolved humans," Elara said, her voice trembling as she reviewed her data. "They've merged with the planet's ecosystem. Their biology is intertwined with the environment. It's symbiotic." "Symbiotic or not, they tried to kill us," Reyes snapped. "That's all I care about." Sienna held up a hand to silence the brewing argument. "Focus. We're not leaving this planet until we figure out what happened to the Erebus. Those colonists were our people once, and we owe it to them, and ourselves, to understand what went wrong." "Commander," Arjun interjected, his voice hesitant, "we've got a problem." Sienna turned to him sharply. "What now?" "The ship's sensors are picking up interference," Arjun explained, his fingers flying over the controls. "It's coming from the forest below. Some kind of electromagnetic field." "Another trap?" Reyes asked, narrowing his eyes. "Not exactly," Arjun said. "It's broadcasting something." "Broadcasting?" Sienna moved to his console, leaning over to examine the data. Sure enough, the interference wasn't random noise. It was a signal, structured, deliberate, and originating deep within the forest. Could it be from the Erebus? Kane asked, hope flickering in his voice. Possibly, Arjun replied. But it's heavily encrypted. It'll take time to decode? You've got 30 minutes, Sienna said, her jaw tightening. Kane, keep us in low orbit. Reyes, prep for a potential ground mission. We might need to go back. Back? Reyes said incredulously. Commander, we barely made it out alive the first time. And we'll do it again if we have to, Sienna shot back. This isn't up for debate. Reyes muttered something under his breath but complied, heading toward the armory. As the ship maintained its position over the forest, the atmosphere inside was tense. Elara worked alongside Arjun to decipher the signal, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Arjun sat back in his chair, his face pale. It's not from the Erebus, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then what is it? Sienna demanded. It's a warning, Arjun said. A warning not to go deeper into the forest. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. From who? Elara asked, her voice trembling. Before Arjun could answer, the ship's alarm blared, the sound reverberating through the hull. What now? Kane shouted, scrambling to check the controls. We've got movement, Reyes yelled from the armory. They're coming out of the forest. On the external monitors, the glowing figures were swarming the clearing below, their bioluminescent forms pulsating like a single, unified organism. But this time, they weren't stopping at the boundary. They're not just standing there anymore, Kane said, his voice tight with fear. They're climbing. Sienna's eyes widened as the creatures began scaling the plateau, their limbs elongating unnaturally to grip the sheer rock. How the hell are they doing that? Reyes growled, grabbing his pulse rifle. They're adapting, Elara whispered, her face pale. They're learning. Seal the ship, Sienna ordered, her voice sharp. No one gets in. The crew scrambled to secure the ship, but the creatures were relentless. They slammed into the hull with unnatural strength, their glowing veins leaving trails of light wherever they touched. We can't stay here, Kane shouted. Sienna knew he was right. Take us higher, she said. Kane engaged the thrusters, and the ship began to ascend. But as it rose, one of the creatures leapt onto the viewport, its translucent face pressed against the glass. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intelligence, and for a moment, Sienna felt as if it were staring directly into her soul. Get it off, she shouted. Reyes fired through the emergency viewport cannon, the blast obliterating the creature. But as its remains disintegrated into light, a new wave of creatures appeared, crawling over each other in a frenzy to reach the ship. We can't keep this up, Kane yelled. Then we need to change tactics, Sienna said, her mind racing. She turned to Arjun. Is there any way to track the origin of that signal? Arjun hesitated, his hands trembling over the controls. Yes, but... Do it, Sienna interrupted. We need answers, and I'm not leaving this planet until we get them. Arjun nodded, his fingers flying over the console. Within moments, a new set of coordinates appeared on the monitor. It's coming from an underground facility, he said. About 20 clicks from here. Sienna nodded. Kane, set a course. Reyes, Elara, you're with me. We're going down there. Commander, Elara said, her voice shaking, we don't know what's waiting for us. That's exactly why we need to find out, Sienna said. The ship veered toward the new coordinates, the creatures falling away as they left the clearing behind. But Sienna knew they weren't retreating. They were regrouping. As the Proxima Dawn approached the facility, a massive structure came into view, hidden beneath layers of dense foliage. Unlike the colony, this building was pristine, untouched by the planet's corruption. What is that? Reyes asked, his voice filled with awe. I don't know, Sienna said, her eyes narrowing. But we're about to find out. The ship landed in a clearing near the facility, and the team disembarked, weapons drawn. The air here was different, heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. The entrance to the facility was sealed, its smooth, metallic surface devoid of any markings. But as they approached, it lit up, a series of symbols glowing faintly before the door slid open with a hiss. "Welcome," a voice said, echoing from within. Sienna froze, her heart pounding. "Who's there?" There was no answer, only the soft hum of machinery and the faint pulse of light from within the facility. "Stay close," Sienna said, stepping inside. The interior was unlike anything they had seen, sleek, advanced, and utterly alien. It was clear this wasn't human technology. "What the hell is this place?" Reyes muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. Before Sienna could respond, a holographic figure materialized before them. It was humanoid but not entirely human, its features shifting and fluid. "Why have you come?" the figure asked, its voice resonating in their minds as much as their ears. Sienna stepped forward, her weapon lowered but ready. "We're here to find the lost colony." "The Erebus?" The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes unreadable. "The colony is no longer as it was. They have become something new." "What do you mean?" Elara asked, her voice trembling. "They have joined with the planet," the figure said. "A necessary adaptation to survive." "And the creatures out there?" Reyes demanded. "Are they part of this adaptation?" The figure hesitated. "They are the price of survival. And now you must decide, will you join them or leave?" The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. "We're not leaving without answers," Sienna said firmly. "Then prepare," the figure said, its form flickering. "The planet does not take kindly to intruders." The lights in the facility dimmed, and a low rumble echoed through the walls. "They're coming," Reyes growled, raising his weapon. Sienna tightened her grip on her sidearm, her heart racing. They had come seeking answers, but the truth was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The rumbling intensified, shaking the ground beneath their feet as the distant hum of the planet's malevolence grew louder. The holographic figure flickered, its form distorting like a signal caught in a storm. "The Adapted will not allow you to remain here," it said, its voice cold and detached. "You are an anomaly, a disruption to their harmony." Sienna Holt didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the hologram, her weapon steady in her hands. "Harmony? They attacked us. They're hunting us." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You perceive them as predators. They perceive you as a threat." "Enough with the riddles," Reyes growled, his rifle pointed at the figure. "What the hell is this place? What are you?" "I am the Archivist," the hologram replied. "This facility was designed to monitor and guide the colony. But when the transformation began, my role shifted to preservation and containment." Elara, trembling but curious, stepped forward. "Transformation? Containment? What caused this? Was it the planet?" The Archivist's gaze bore into hers. "The planet is alive. Its ecosystem functions as a single, unified organism. When the colonists arrived, they disrupted its balance. In response, the planet sought equilibrium. The colonists were assimilated." Sienna's stomach churned. "Assimilated? You mean, those creatures out there were the colonists?" "Correct," the Archivist said. "But not all. Some resisted, retreating to the facility. Their resistance failed. Now, the Adapted guard this planet, ensuring no further disruptions." "And what about us?" Kane's voice crackled over the comms. He was back aboard the ship, monitoring from above. "Are we considered a disruption?" The Archivist's form glitched, its tone unchanging. "Your presence is an anomaly. You must leave or face the same fate." The rumbling grew louder, and the facility's walls began to shift. Panels slid apart, revealing intricate networks of glowing veins pulsing with an alien rhythm. "They're here," Reyes hissed, scanning the corridor with his rifle. From the darkness beyond, shapes began to emerge, twisted, luminous forms that moved with an unnatural grace. The Adapted had arrived. Sienna motioned for her team to fall back. "Reyes, cover the rear. Elara, Arjun, stick close. We're not dying here." Reyes opened fire as the first Adapted lunged forward, its elongated limbs slicing through the air. The creature's bioluminescent skin rippled with color, each bullet impacting with a sickening squelch but failing to slow it down. "They're not going down," Reyes shouted, his voice laced with panic. "Shoot for the joints," Sienna barked. "Aim where they're weakest." Elara and Arjun scrambled to follow her orders, firing at the creature's elongated limbs. The tactic worked. One of the adapted collapsed, its movements jerky and erratic. But for every one they slowed, two more emerged from the shadows. "They're swarming!" Elara cried, her voice rising in terror. "We need to move," Sienna yelled, pulling a grenade from her belt. "Go. Now." She hurled the grenade into the advancing mass, the explosion briefly lighting up the corridor. The adapted recoiled, their movements disjointed, but they quickly regrouped, their glowing forms undeterred. The team sprinted deeper into the facility, the archivist's voice echoing through the halls. "You cannot outrun them," it said. "The adapted will pursue until you are neutralized." "Then help us," Sienna snapped, her frustration boiling over. The archivist hesitated. "There is a way. But it requires a choice." "What choice?" Sienna demanded, her voice sharp as they reached a circular chamber at the heart of the facility. The room was unlike anything they had seen before. Its walls pulsed with a strange energy, and a central console glowed with alien symbols. "The console contains the override," the archivist said. "It can deactivate the adapted, but only temporarily." "What's the catch?" Reyes asked, panting as he took a defensive position near the entrance. "Using the override will disrupt the planet's balance," the archivist explained. "The consequences are unpredictable." Sienna gritted her teeth. "Unpredictable? Like unleashing something worse than the adapted." "Correct," the archivist said. "But it is your only option if you wish to survive." The team exchanged uneasy glances. The adapted were closing in, their distorted forms visible through the corridor's shifting walls. "We don't have time for debate," Sienna said, stepping toward the console. "I'm activating it." "Wait!" Elara shouted, grabbing her arm. "What if the archivist is lying? What if this makes things worse?" "And what's your alternative?" Reyes snapped. "Let them tear us apart?" Elara hesitated, her fear clashing with her instincts. "I don't know. But this feels like a trap." Sienna looked at her team, then at the advancing adapted. The choice weighed heavily on her, but there was no time for doubt. "Cover me," she said, ignoring Elara's protest. Reyes and Arjun opened fire as Sienna approached the console. The symbols shifted under her touch, rearranging themselves into a sequence she could barely comprehend. The facility began to hum, the energy in the room building to a crescendo. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster," Reyes shouted as the adapted surged forward, their bioluminescent forms pulsing with aggression. With a final press, the console lit up and a deafening pulse echoed through the facility. The adapted froze mid-lunge, their forms shuddering violently before collapsing to the ground. The team stood in stunned silence, the room now eerily quiet. "Did it work?" Arjun asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Sienna could answer, the archivist reappeared, its holographic form flickering. "You have disrupted the adapted," it said. "But the balance is broken. The planet will retaliate." "What does that mean?" Sienna demanded. The facility began to shake, the walls splitting open to reveal the glowing, pulsating veins beneath. The ground trembled as a low, guttural roar echoed from deep within the planet. "It means," the archivist said, its voice tinged with finality, "you have awakened something far worse." Sienna's heart sank as the team braced themselves. The battle for survival was far from over, and the stakes had just risen to an unimaginable level. The ground heaved beneath their feet, throwing the team into chaos. The walls of the chamber splintered and reformed as if the facility itself were alive, reacting to their presence. Pulsing veins of alien energy coursed through the structure, lighting the room in an eerie, shifting glow. Sienna staggered to her feet, gripping the console for balance. "What the hell is happening?" "The balance is collapsing," the archivist intoned, its holographic form flickering erratically. The core of the planet is awakening. You have destabilized its equilibrium. What does that mean for us? Reyes shouted, bracing against the rumbling. The archivist's glowing eyes turned toward him. It means the planet will eradicate the disturbance, you. A deafening roar reverberated through the facility, unlike anything they'd heard before. It wasn't the guttural cry of the adapted but something far deeper, more primal. The sound resonated in their bones, a predatory presence that seemed to emanate from the planet itself. "We need to get out of here!" Elara yelled, her voice tinged with panic. Sienna snapped into action, slinging her weapon over her shoulder. "Move! Back to the ship!" The team bolted toward the exit, but the facility seemed to fight against them. The walls shifted, corridors narrowing and twisting into new configurations. The ground split open, revealing chasms filled with writhing, bioluminescent tendrils that lashed out like living whip. "It's trying to trap us!" Arjun shouted, firing his rifle at one of the tendrils. "Then we make our own path," Sienna growled, pulling a demolition charge from her pack. She slapped it against a wall and triggered the timer. "Everyone, get back!" The charge detonated, blasting a hole through the shifting structure. Dust and debris filled the air, but beyond the gap, they could see the faint glow of daylight. "This way!" Sienna barked, leading the charge through the breach. As they emerged into the open, the landscape around the facility had transformed. The towering crystalline spires were now writhing, their surfaces rippling like liquid. The ground cracked and buckled, geysers of glowing vapor erupting into the air. The ship was visible in the distance, its landing lights a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. But between them and safety, the adapted had returned. "They're back!" Reyes shouted, raising his rifle. The creatures were different now, larger, faster, their forms more grotesque. They moved with a coordinated fury, their bioluminescent bodies glowing brighter as if fueled by the planet's rage. "Keep moving!" Sienna ordered, firing at the closest creature. The rest of the team opened fire, their weapons lighting up the battlefield. Arjun went down first, a clawed appendage slashing across his chest before he could react. He collapsed, his body convulsing as the adapted began to drag him away. "Arjun!" Elara screamed, raising her rifle to fire. "Leave him!" Sienna shouted, grabbing Elara's arm. "We can't save him now." Tears streaming down her face, Elara obeyed, running alongside Sienna and Reyes toward the ship. As they neared the landing ramp, the ship's external guns roared to life, shredding the closest adapted. Kane's voice crackled over the comms. "Get on board. I'm not waiting if this thing starts to collapse." Sienna led the charge up the ramp, firing behind her to cover Elara and Reyes. The adapted surged forward, their glowing forms clawing at the edges of the ramp. "Close it!" Sienna shouted as they stumbled into the cargo bay. The ramp sealed shut, the sound of clawing metal replaced by the hum of the ship's engines. "We're in!" Sienna yelled into her comm, "Take off!" The ship lurched upward, the engines straining against the planet's gravity. Through the viewport, Sienna could see the landscape writhing, the spires collapsing into the ground as the planet tore itself apart. But then, the ship shuddered violently. "What now?" Reyes shouted, gripping a support beam. "They've latched onto the hull." Kane's voice came over the comms. "I can't break orbit with this weight." Sienna didn't hesitate. "Reyes, with me. Elara, stay here and secure the cargo bay." They rushed to the lower decks, where the external cameras showed several adapted clinging to the ship, their claws piercing the hull. "We need to get them off, or we're dead," Sienna said, pulling an emergency hatch release. "You're not seriously opening that, are you?" Reyes asked, his eyes wide. "Just long enough to deal with them," Sienna replied. She grabbed an oxygen mask and a tether, clipping it to her suit. "You're insane," Reyes muttered, but he followed suit, readying his weapon. The hatch opened, and the roar of escaping atmosphere filled the air. Sienna and Reyes stepped onto the narrow platform, the adapted immediately turning their attention to them. Sienna aimed her rifle and fired, the explosive rounds ripping through the creature's bioluminescent bodies. Reyes followed suit, his shots precise and deadly. One of the adapted lunged toward Sienna, its elongated limbs reaching for her. She ducked, slamming an emergency release lever that detached a section of the hull, sending the creature hurtling into the void. Two more! Reyes shouted, firing at another that had latched onto the engine. Sienna activated her comm. Kane, give me a read. Are we clear yet? Almost, Kane replied. One left on the starboard wing. Sienna spotted it, a massive adapted, its body pulsating with energy. It was larger than the others, its form shifting and expanding as if feeding on the ship's energy. I'll take care of it, Sienna said, unclipping her tether. Are you crazy? Reyes shouted. No time to argue, she snapped, leaping onto the wing. The creature turned toward her, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. Sienna planted a charge on the wing and activated the timer. Let's see you adapt to this, she muttered, pushing off the wing and activating her suit's thrusters. The charge detonated, the explosion ripping through the creature and the wing. Sienna was thrown back, tumbling through the void before her tether yanked her back toward the ship. Reyes pulled her inside, slamming the hatch shut. You're insane, he said, panting. But we're alive, Sienna replied, a grim smile on her face. Back in the cockpit, the ship broke free of the planet's gravity, the writhing surface growing smaller in the viewport. Kane let out a breath. We're clear. Barely. Sienna slumped into a chair, her body trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. Elara entered, her face pale but determined. What now? Sienna stared out at the void, her mind racing. We report what happened here. Every detail. But we make sure no one else comes back. Reyes nodded, his face grim. Because whatever's down there, it's not done. As the ship disappeared into the vastness of space, the planet below continued to shift and pulse, its secrets buried but far from forgotten.